To the sound. To the sound. To the sound. To the sound.
All right, welcome. It's another edition of Arguments Against Atheism by MadebyJimbob. Well, actually, it's actually my responses to them, but anyways, it's basically my responses to a series that MadebyJimbob is doing, Arguments Against Atheism. And so I'm going to be watching his second video. Let me move my water over here. I'm going to be watching his second video on this particular topic. Let me see here. Make sure I've got this going on here. Get that there. Get this here. So I get ready for this. So let me know if you can hear me. Let me know if everything's fine and dandy. Hopefully that's the... that's not it. I had the video. Where to go? Get it all set up and it all goes to crap. 1 second. But while you're doing that, while I'm doing this, let me know if you guys can hear me out there so I can make sure that the audio is correct. Because I have the video here somewhere. No, apparently not. Okay, 1 second. Let me get this video because I just changed things over and apparently it all went to heck. So I will do that in 1 second here. Got to find his video again. How can I review a video if I can't find it, right? Jimbob. There we go. All right, let me get this into a tab. Oh, hang on, Jimbob. Hang on, he's talking already. I'm not ready yet, Jimbob. I have to get this in a tab, buddy. So then I'll start talking about it. Okay, let me see. Get this in OBS. People don't realize it's a process doing this stuff, man. It is like ridiculous. No, that's my thing. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. There we go. And then let me see if this shows here. There we go. Look at that. I did it. Anyways, welcome out there. I see some familiar names. I got Willie Mayfan. How you doing, Willie? Got Colorado Biker. Yeah, buddy. Got Dan the Machine. All right. So everybody's saying the audio is perfect. So that's outstanding. So let me just kind of give an introduction to what he's doing in this particular video. Now they got the technical aspects worked out. So he's arguing about the problem of evil. Now, there are two types of problem of evil. There's the logical problem of evil, and there's the evidential problem of evil. And to give you a little synopsis in this 5-minute video that we're going to be watching as we go through, he does jump, and it is very clear that he jumps from the logical problem to the evidential problem, and I don't know why. But basically, the logical problem of evil basically is written such that there's a bunch of statements, a bunch of premises, that all of them cannot be true at the same time. It's called an inconsistent logical system, meaning that you have a bunch of premises that none of them can all be true at the same time. 3 of them, in this case, there's 3 or 4, and then if you have 4 logical statements, 3 of them can be true at the same time. 1 of them must be false. That's what the logical problem of evil basically is. It depends on who articulates it and how it's structured. The original one was basically just, yeah, you have an omnipotent God, and if there's an omnipotent God, then how can there be evil? Because, as an omnibenevolent, omnipotent God, omniscient God, he's going to want to have a world without evil because he can fix things. So the attributes that they're assigning to this deity that are omni properties are not something that logically can be true at the same time while evil exists. And so this is why it's called the logical problem of evil and not the same as the evidential problem of evil. It's not really of importance what it means by natural law or natural evil, something like that. It's just basically, here's the problem of evil, originally by Epicurus. It's been reformulated by Hume and Draper and Malik and other people, I believe. But basically, we'll run through it as he's talking about it, but I just want to make sure that people understand as we go through this, he is talking or wants to talk about the logical problem of evil. But then I think he jumps at the shark and goes to the evidential. But really, it's just the logical. All right, we up to date? We good to go so far? Colorado Biker says, I am evil and it's not a problem, at least for me. Well, yeah, that would be a logical, non-fallacious, non-inconsistent logical system. Right? Colorado Biker is not omnibenevolent, but he is evil. Therefore, he's not a problem. It's not a problem, right? And I got 3 monitors over here, so I'm kind of trying to watch live chat too. So if I miss something, please forgive me. But let's start this off, Jim Bob. Let's see what you got. Make sure you guys can hear this. I got the speaker on for him, and here we go.
In this episode, we take a look at the very popular atheist argument called the argument from evil.
All right, is that loud enough? Let me know if I need to boost that up. It doesn't look very loud on my end. I mean, I do have filters on it, but I can edit those filters out. Is that loud enough, or I need to kick up the gain a little bit? I can kick up the gain to 5, I think. Might do it, 5 decibels. Because that doesn't seem very loud to me for some reason. Oh, 1 second. I have it max, and it's just because I have a compressor on, and it just doesn't seem very loud. Noise suppression's off, noise gate's off, compressor's on. A bit louder. Okay. All right, let's try now.
Which is often claimed to be a defeater to God's very existence. Welcome to Arguments Against Atheism. I'm Jim Bob.
I think it's the video. I think it's the sound on his end that isn't very loud because I got all my noise suppression off, and it still doesn't seem very loud. So I'm going to kick it up to 10 dB. So
The goods. So what is the argument from evil?
I
don't want to straw man it, so...
Is that better? Is that better? Let me know. I got it at 10 dB, so that should be really loud on your guys' end.
Let's get it in precise form. The argument from evil goes as follows.
It goes as follows. Premise
God
1.
is omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent. Premise 2. An all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful God wouldn't permit...
All right. Before we get to the first one, these are, and they, by the way, this is straight up the most simplest version of the logical problem of evil. This is straightforward. This is a contested of what they mean by the logical problem of evil. When they do get into it, they mean by omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent, right? But we'll get into that. But so far, this is straight up. This is a straight logical problem of evil. So premise 1: God is omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent. So he's all-knowing, all good, and all-powerful. And we'll get into kind of what those mean. And then an all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful God wouldn't permit suffering, right? And then
suffering in the world. Premise 3.
Suffering
there is
exists.
Suffering in the world. Conclusion. God knows suffering will occur, so he either can't stop suffering, so he's not omnipotent, or he refuses to, so he's not omnibenevolent.
Now, there is something I will note on this. The logical problem of evil isn't specifically suffering. Okay, and this is where I think he kind of may have reworded this a little bit, because the logical problem of evil is they're an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving God wouldn't allow evil in the world. That's the original logical problem of evil. And the conclusion is there is evil in the world. Whether it be gratuitous evil, natural evil, moral evil, ontological evil, whatever evil you want. There are different types of evils. But it really is the problem of evil, not the logical problem of suffering. So I think that's a little bit of a change there, because suffering is a type of evil, but there are other types of evils out there that are used for the logical problem of evil. So I think it really should be an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful God wouldn't allow evil to exist in the world. Therefore, an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful being or God doesn't exist, okay?
Alrighty. Did you see any obvious problems?
No.
I did.
Well, what was
Premise
that?
2 states
All right, he sees problems. All right, Jim Bob, what was the problem? Premise
an
2.
all-knowing, all-loving, and all-good God wouldn't permit suffering in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why not? What's the
Well, why not? Well, hey, I'll let him finish his train of thought.
contradiction? It seems this very low-level argument from personal incredulity has no basis.
Okay. Well, it isn't an argument from incredulity. That it really isn't. Matter of fact, I've never seen anybody attack the logical problem of evil the way he's doing it. The way the logical problem of evil is generally attacked is by a defense, it's called. Remember what I said initially. There's two types of problem of evil. There's a logical problem of evil and there's the evidential problem of evil. The logical problem of evil is usually a defense that is actually called a defense. So it's the defense of the logical problem of evil. And then the evidential has what's called a theodicy. So a theodicy is a justification for why there is evil, but a defense is why is this not a logical problem? Now, remember that logical structure, again, suffering should be evil, but I'll be there as may. I'll let him slide on that. You have to show that the logic is either invalid or unsound, right? The logic is clearly valid. That structure is called modus tollens. P implies Q, not Q, therefore not P. Perfectly valid. So the soundness of the argument goes, are those premises true? And again, you have to remember, and this is something that's really important because I see atheists screw this up a lot. Now remember, what these are hoped to do is have atheists become better at trying to have argumentation for these types of arguments when somebody like Jim Bob or theist talks about them. So the soundness is again, these are all assumed, right? If somebody says, well, premise 1 is not demonstrated. Well, clearly premise 1 is not demonstrated. Let's go back a little bit. I think it's important to touch on this before I get into his argument from incredulity, which is not a defense of the logical problem of evil. I've never seen an argument of incredulity used as a defense of the logical problem of evil. I've seen Plantinga's argument of free will, which I'll get into, and I actually think Plantinga does a pretty decent job, but there is ways around his defense, which we'll get into. But we have to assume that these are true, right? So it's really like if God is omniscient, omnipotent, benevolent, and omnipotent. That is true. It is an if condition. It's a hypothetical. So we're assuming if it is these conditions, it's not assuming that such a being does exist by fiat. It's not defining God into existence. It's not arguing God into his existence. It's the same problem that I run into when I have my arguments and my logical arguments that I have out there, like my WASP argument, my weak atheist special pleading argument, or my ASC argument, the atheist semantic collapse argument. Those are logical proofs that are based upon what's called a conditional or material implication, if then. So just because something starts with an if doesn't mean that it's a bad argument. That's how all things start. And this really is if God is omniscient. I don't know why I do this. If God is omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent, just the omni qualities. It comes from Anselm of Canterbury. Anselm's version of God was just he had these omni properties. And like I said, I will discuss what they mean by that. But I want to get into that atheists who just say, well, this is a bad argument because it's a first premise hasn't been demonstrated. Who cares? It's irrelevant if it's been demonstrated or not. These are axioms. And a theist could argue that, improperly as well. Oh, it hasn't been proven. It doesn't matter. You don't have to prove axioms. They're assumed. You accept them or you don't accept them. If you don't accept them, why not? And premise 1 isn't the being you have to accept such a being exists. You have to accept that if a being exists that has these properties, then you have to conclude that such a being cannot exist by contradiction, by modus tollens. That's what it's arguing, right? And you can attack any one of these premises, and there's only two. So premise 1, not many people attack that one. I don't know how you would attack that one. Because it's just stipulated that God has these properties. We're talking about a very specific, very narrow type of God out there. Okay, the logical problem of evil really only talks about a very specific Anselm of Canterbury type God. So he attacks number 2, as somebody pointed out. Hank points out. He attacks the second premise in this particular argument. And his argument is basically, why not? Well, I'm going to tell him why not. But let's get
It's the
into this.
contradiction. It seems this very low-level argument from personal incredulity has no basis. From a Christian view, long-suffering is actually a virtue.
Okay. Here's why it's a problem. Okay. The way Plantinga generally, or where a defense actually technically tries to defeat this particular argument of logical problem evil, is that God could not have created a world, a possible world, where he allowed man to have free will or free agency that didn't include some kind of evil. In this case, we're talking about a moral evil, even or natural evil. I guess it doesn't matter. Any kind of evil. Okay, that's how the defense of the logical problem of evil is actually generally run by a theist. Again, this is not incredulity, because the reason why his argument falls flat is because looking at the properties of what they mean by omniscient and knowing. Okay, let's get into that first. Let's look what premise one is actually saying. And I know I'm only a minute into this and I'm already diving into it. I apologize. Sorry, not sorry. But let's look at what the premise one really kind of looks like. Omniscient in this thing is a God that can know anything and all that's knowable. Okay? God cannot know anything that is unknowable. And the way that the Molinist, the way that the Plantinga argument would be run, is that God has this middle knowledge. And what they mean by that is that there's three types of knowledge out there. Okay? There's the first knowledge of God, which is knowledge of all necessary truths. And if you see me looking over here, I'm looking at my live chat. I'm going to pop it up because I'm having a hard time seeing it here. So one sec. I don't want to ignore you guys. You guys always add great stuff to this stuff about chat. And maybe make this big. Make it big so I can see it, because I'm old and I'm blind and it's very hard to see it my screen here. One sec. There we go. Oh, Andrew Wilson's here. Hey, what's up, Andrew? He says, McCrae, so formal using my last name, my friend. He says, I got to disagree with you here. Andrew Wilson here. Any chance we can tangle on this for a few minutes? Absolutely. Let me, if you don't mind, I don't know if you're in a hurry, let me run through this real quick and then I can bring you in. Is that cool? Andrew, like I said, I really respect Andrew. And I will go on record as saying this. I know a lot of people have issues with him. I know he deals with a lot of social, political stuff like that I don't get into at all. But on the record, the dude was nothing but kind to me. The dude was nothing but cordial, respectful. And, that's what I look for. I look for somebody who really wants to talk about the topics without, getting into this visceral type of attack, right? But I do want to get through this first. And then if he wants to join afterwards, I'm totally down for that. Okay, cool. So the three types of knowledge, because I want to explain the arguments first, right? The three types of knowledge. So the first knowledge is that God has knowledge of all logical possibilities, all logical truths, all logical necessities. That something would be a necessary being, not necessarily with intentional states, but something with a necessary truth that must exist in all possible worlds. And there are some limitations that as well. There might be possible worlds where necessary truths don't exist, but that's going to get really deep into possible world theory that I cannot get into because that stuff's complicated. But basically, the first level of knowledge, or first knowledge, is basically necessary truths. Second knowledge, or the middle knowledge, which is Molinism, Plantinga calls it, or not, William Lane Craig calls it open theism, or what's the other thing he calls it? Middle knowledge. Yeah, open theism, I guess. And that's a knowledge of counterfactuals, which would be in possible worlds, situations that could have been different. Right? So God would have not just knowledge of all necessary truths, but knowledge of all possible worlds where there could have been something different, where a contingent fact could have been different, called a counterfactual. That's the middle knowledge. And then the third knowledge would be God's knowledge of all the future things and the actual ontology of the world. Okay? So it would be thinking of, like, there's a whole bunch of branches that could possibly be. And God knows all different branches of all different types of things and what could possibly be, but he's limited to the middle knowledge of the fact that those counterfactuals exist, but which way is somebody going to go? That's the free will aspect. That would be God saying, well, I know the types of choices that a person can do, but he doesn't know which choice somebody's going to make. Now, he can make a good guess, I guess, but that's the kind of the argument for middle knowledge, that God is only knowing of the counterfactuals. But I've seen people argue, well, he knows people well enough he knows what's going to happen. So even though there is a choice to be made, it's still going to end up this particular way. Okay, and so that goes in, like I said, what's called Molinism, and that basically is again some natural knowledge of these metaphysical necessary truths, the middle knowledge of future contingencies or counterfactuals, and then the knowledge of the ontological knowledge. So that's what omniscient means. Now, omnibenevolent means all good, and people would say, and his argument right now is for incredulity as well. If he's all good, why is it inconsistent to have evil? Because there's suffering. And the response to that is, well, why does he need so much suffering? Right? I mean, if there's a reason we can have free will, and I can learn my lesson about suffering with just stubbing my toe 50 times, that's a canonical thing, stubbing toe, 50 times in my life, why is it that this actualized possible world, I stub my toes 50 times rather than 49? What does it be gained by stubbing my toe one extra time to have that suffering? Because if God knows all the possible worlds out there, why did he not actualize a possible world? Why stub my toe 49? And of course, the theist will come back and say, well, that's because God's plan was specifically to this particular actualized world, which means that God was beholden to only create this actualized world, which seems to kind of to dismiss his sovereignty, and that he's omnipotent, which means all powerful. But one thing to keep in mind that the theist is not positing an omnipotent God as some God that can do all things illogically. Now, I have seen Christians do it, and I think they're way off base on this one. I mean, this is very rare, but most Christians will recognize, because of what's called the principle of eternal verities, that God can only do things within his nature, or God can only do things that are logically possible. So in other words, God cannot create a square circle. Okay? God cannot do things that even would be considered to be metaphysically against his nature, like force somebody to do something, right? Because if God gave man free will, he can't go into his head and force him to do something. Now, maybe he could and he chooses not to, because if he's all powerful, he theoretically could just beam a thought into your head. He theoretically could force you to do something that you don't want to do. But the theist could argue, well, that's just against his nature. And I don't really have a stance on that either way. To me, an omnipotent God could do something like that. He could make you do something, but he just doesn't. But the theist can argue, well, he can't, because it's against his nature, which would be a contradiction. And I'm okay with that. I'm not too much against that. Okay, so that's what they mean by these logical problem of evils, right?
So he's not thematic in the Christian view and praxis.
So I don't understand
this premise also makes an assumption that suffering is evil.
It is.
My question to the atheist is, what makes suffering evil?
That depends on what you mean by evil.
Yeah, well, it kind of does. And I think it's supposed to be a Jordan Peterson type thing. Suffering is evil because there's different graduations, different levels of what can be considered to be a natural evil, even, and suffering. Minor suffering, inconveniences, minor morality things are way different than horrific, gratuitous evils that are there to cause intense pain. What is there to gain out of suffering from intense pain? A child that is born with some horrific disease, like what's that disease out there? Mannequin syndrome, isn't it? One of the most god awful, horrifying type diseases and congenital deformations of all time. It's just horrible, that type of disease. Why does God need something like that? What does that have to do with free will? Right? That would be more of a natural occurrence of free will, or at least a ontological free will. Evil, rather than a moral evil. A moral evil would be something along the lines of you stealing something to feed. But then if you steal something to feed yourself, is it still evil? Depends on your type of normative ethics. To a a moral pluralist, it's still evil, but it's the lesser of two evils. To a moral relativist, it's not evil at all. To a moral absolutist, it would be evil. So it really depends on your framework that you want to look at what is evil. But I think a rational person would argue that someone stealing to survive for food is different in degree of moral evil than what would happen in the Holocaust, or something that along the lines of killing of innocent victims just for fun. I would even think that the theist would acknowledge that between two choices, like torturing an innocent victim for fun or stealing a loaf of bread to survive, one of them is going to be a greater moral evil. I think that we just understand that to be the case. Now, whatever moral theory you appeal to, that's up to you. I do believe in moral realism, which would be more objectivism. But again, that doesn't mean that everything that has to do with morality is objective. It just means that some moral facts are objectively true. Not absolute, but objectively true.
Is having an infected tooth evil?
Yes.
Is a hurricane evil?
Yes.
What about a lion eating a baby zebra? Is that evil?
No. Well, it's not evil because, again, that's their biological nature is to do that, right? But they're not an agent of moral consideration. We are moral agents, meaning that we know, because of the fact that we're both sapient and sentient beings, we are aware of our own existence. We have a duty and obligation to be stewards to animals. We take care of them, cats, dogs. Anybody who thinks it's okay to harm an animal for some gratuitous evil purpose, just to satisfy their own sadistic needs, that's morally wrong. And that is objectively morally wrong. And somebody can disagree with me, an atheist can go, oh, I don't believe in objective morality. Okay, you're fine. You don't have to. Okay, but as a non-believer myself, somebody who does not believe in God, somebody who does not accept Christianity, it is morally evil to harm an animal just for the sake of our harming them. Okay? And somebody will say, well, how do you justify that? That's a whole different topic, but it is, to me, a moral fact that as somebody who grounds morality in virtue ethics and eudaimonia, that we have an obligation to have stewardship over other lesser beings, lesser creatures. Okay, so yes, the first two are called natural evils, and even everybody in the literature agrees with that. Plantinga would agree with this. Rowe would agree with this. Draper would agree with this. Those are just standard examples of moral evil. The other canonical one is stubbing one's toe. Not moral evil, a natural evil. Okay.
These are all examples of things at most we find unpleasant. If I went to a restaurant and found the chicken special to be unpleasant, would it make sense to leave a review that stated, "Don't get the chicken. It was immoral"?
No, it wouldn't. And Jim Bob is confused here, I think. It is not just some subjective opinion about morality based upon being, inconvenienced or something you dislike. That's not what we mean by morality. And I think that he's been talking to very low-level atheists out there that just want to say that morality is all subjective, it's just opinion-based. And sure, they can argue that. I disagree with them wholeheartedly on that. I don't think it's opinion-based. I think it is based upon the natural view of the universe. I think it is something that has to do with the universe. The fact that we exist as moral agents has moral facts. And even the subjectivists would argue that immoral facts do exist, but their true and false values are subjective in nature, while the moral objectivist says, no, they're not subjective in nature. They are based upon an objective measure of the grounding of harms and benefits. And again, that is a hypothetical imperative. I grant that. It's not a categorical imperative. It's not Kant's categorical imperative. It's here's a goal. The goal is to prevent suffering. And if you harm somebody, it is objectively against that grounding, that moral grounding. You don't have to accept that moral grounding. It is arbitrary. But once you accept that moral grounding, you can build an objective moral framework. And I do think Sam Harris is correct on that. But I think he does go too far, and I think he does inappropriately sometimes try to cross into that line of categorical imperative. And I think that's where the problem lies, and this is where he's called out for. Because if you stay in the hypothetical imperative, objective morality exists. And that could be argued very well. But as soon as you get into the categorical, you do run into what's called Hume's guillotine, or the is-ought problem. And that just means that if you have some kind of fact of the world, some fact of the matter about the state of affairs of the universe, how do you get a moral value out of that? There's something missing. There's a hidden premise that always exists between the moral fact and the moral value. That's called the is-ought problem. And a lot of theists will bring that up. Like, how do you solve the is-ought problem? That only really exists in the categorical imperative. If you have the hypothetical imperative where you have a grounding and you base that on virtue ethics, which are ethics that are based upon character, the Aristotelian characters, then you are not starting with the fact, you're starting with the value. And so there is no bridging between the fact and the value. You're starting with the value. And again, this is all my opinion. There are people out there that know moral theory a billion times more than me, okay? But this is how I understand it. This is how I typically argue it. And somebody who's an expert would probably come along and go, hey, Steve, you're an idiot. But you know what? That's cool. I accept that. But let me ask you guys so far, am I making at least sense to you as it stands? You don't have to agree with me, but as it stands, does this at least so far make sense to you? Because that's really the whole goal, okay?
No, that's silly.
Of course it's silly.
Preferences are preferences.
It's not preferences. Morality is not preferences. Okay, I mean, there is something called cultural relativism or historical relativism. This is the opposite of moral absolutism, not moral objectivism. And I see theists and atheists make this mistake constantly. You have moral objectivism and moral subjectivism. Both of them are moral cognitivist positions, meaning that they believe that the proposition is true or false. Yeah, there's a fact of the matter that exists that's true, that makes that proposition true or false. That's a moral subjectivist. Okay, so if you say morals are subjective, you are implicitly saying that there are moral propositions that are moral facts of the matter that exist that can make a proposition true or false. So if I said stealing is wrong, the moral objectivist and moral subjectivist, because they're both moral cognitivists, would say that is either true or false. And how they go about to know about true or false is called moral epistemology. Hank says you're arguing through personal incredulity. No, not at all. This is exactly how I think it's argued in the literature. This is not a matter of incredulity. I'm not saying, look, it's wrong because, I just don't believe it or I have a hard time accepting it. This is how it's literally, I believe it's argued in the literature. My preference is to moral objectivism. Sure. I'm going to admit that. But the moral non-cognitivists would say there is no propositional fact to the matter. So if you say don't steal, what that really is interpreted as stealing is wrong. What that is interpreted as a prescriptivist is don't steal. As an emotivist, it's called booyah, booyah, boo on that or yay. It's just a feeling, some kind of a intentional state to it, some kind of propositional attitude. It's not. It would be a psychological attitude. It wouldn't even be propositional. It would be a psychological attitude in emotivism. That you feel, okay, this is bad. Stealing is wrong. Boo stealing. But the problem with that is, if you are a moral non-cognitivist, how do you relate, like the logical problem of evil, as propositional? Because you're talking about moral facts. So you can't say something like stealing is wrong and have an argument that stealing is wrong, because if stealing is wrong is not propositional, it has no truth value. Therefore, if it has no truth value, it cannot be used in a syllogism. Okay? But I see a lot of atheists make that mistake where they say, oh, morals are subjective. There is no moral fact of the matter. Well, then if you can't say that, that's a contradiction. If there's a moral fact of the matter, you're going to be a moral objectivist or moral subjectivist, and some other time quasi-realist or whatever. But only when you're a moral anti-realist, when you're a moral error theorist. When you say morals, okay, even a moral error theorist like Mackey, he argued that there are moral propositions and they are truth apt. They do have true or false values, but they're all false. Every moral proposition is false. And what he means by this is, when you say something like stealing is wrong and you say it's false, he's not saying that stealing is good. That's not what he meant by this. What error theory kind of meant was that in the statement, stealing is false, or stealing is wrong, there is no property in the universe called wrongness to instantiate that word wrong. It's an error. It's all false because all the propositions are an error, because there is no such thing metaphysically or ontologically as wrongness to instantiate that sentence, stealing is wrong. Therefore, it is a anti-realist position. Okay?
ethical stances. Now, a very similar position on morality was introduced and made popular by atheist Sam Harris in his book, The Moral Landscape.
I tell you, I'll be honest. I tried getting through that book, and it's rough. I honestly, I can't say that I even. I'll just say I didn't even read it at this point because I was just. it was hard for me to read, and this was years and years and years ago. This is like when it came out. I mean, how long ago did this come out? I mean, I don't want to Google anything. Hey, Alexa, when did The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris came out? Alexa,
The book The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris was published in 2010.
2010. Okay, so I mean, I probably read it in 2013 or something. I don't know. It's been long.
Sam's position was this. Morality is based on the maximization of sentient well-being. And I think we could all agree that suffering is bad. Well, no, Sam, we don't all agree.
Well, and that's true. They don't all agree. The Catholics thought that suffering was great. You know, I mean, wasn't it that Mother Teresa? I mean, supposedly Mother Teresa thrived on suffering. She thought suffering brought you closer to God. I thoroughly disagree. I think suffering is evil, natural evil. And I do think that if there's an omnibenevolent being out there that has the power to change things, why would he not do it? Again, that goes in the logical problem of evil. If I knew everything that is knowable, if I was all powerful that can do anything besides logical contradictions or, a violation of free will, if one wants to argue that, and I have the power, omnipotent, I have the power to change things. Why would you not want a better world? I mean, God has supposedly this heaven that has this perfect world in it. So he knows what it's like to have a perfect world. Why would he not want humans to have a perfect world as well? And again, that goes into Plantinga's free will defense, not theodicy, but defense, which I'll touch on here coming up.
For one, you have to define suffering, as does the atheist who is using the argument from evil. Perhaps the atheist will say, I think that it's fairly obvious that pain is the defining feature of what we call suffering.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't know if Sam Harris does argue that or not. I wouldn't say that, right? I mean, again, if I just have a little bit of inconvenient pain, I'm not suffering. I'm not in a state of, a high degree of pain. So I wouldn't say that just having pain is synonymous with suffering. Jimbob says, if God made the world, you wouldn't know what a better world was. Well, but that's why they have possible world theory, right? I mean, the possible world theory is that there's a world out there that God could have created different, a counterfactual world. If God is limited to this exact world, this actualized world. Now, you have to remember that an actualized world there's only one. No matter what possible worlds are out there, there's only one actualized world, because actualized worlds are indexical, meaning that it is based upon the world that we exist in. So anybody who exists in a different possible world, and I'm a moral anti-realist. I'm sorry, I'm a modal anti-realist. But a modal realist believes that there are actual worlds out there that have these counterfactuals. They're real ontological worlds. David Lewis made arguments for that, and his arguments are way beyond my understanding. And I even asked Graham Priest, if you guys know who he is. He's a very well-known philosopher. I tried to ask Graham Priest about some of David Lewis's modal anti-realism, and I still don't understand it. But whatever. I guess you have to really be like on a master's level to understand. And I'm at a intro to philosophy level, and I admit that. Okay, I admit I am literally at intro to philosophy level. Do not take what I say as authoritative by any means. I am first year, probably first semester, level philosophy. But David Lewis's arguments for modal realism is very, very complicated. But as a modal anti-realist, that means that possible worlds don't physically exist. There's no ontological presence for them. It's just hypotheticals of what would have been different in possible worlds that have counterfactuals, which are contingent things that could have been different. And what they mean by contingent is that, one, it has to exist in one possible world, but not all of them, because if it's all of them, it's necessary. But it just means that something that is based upon something else, something that requires something else to be, It's not a necessary truth, not a necessary being, that those worlds are just possible worlds. And so if God had to actualize this particular world, why? I mean, for what possible reason? Because then we could argue, well, he couldn't have done it any other way. This was his best world for his purposes. But why? That doesn't satisfy the principle of sufficient reason if you subscribe to that. It doesn't satisfy the what's from the argument from contingency, which is predicated on the principle of sufficient reason. Why did God create this particular world? We don't know. We have no access to that knowledge. It is epistemically isolated from us. God has never told us that, if he exists. And even if he did, we just have to believe him. We can't get into the mind of God. Oh, that's interesting. Cindy Hoven just sent me something. Do you guys remember Cindy Hoven? Ken Hoven's ex-wife? Yeah. I've been friends with her a long time. But she just sent me something, but I'll check it out later. Wasn't trying, well, yeah, I'm name dropping. Yeah, cool. Yeah. But Cindy's a sweetheart. Cindy Hoven has been through so much. But I understand why Kent doesn't come back on my channel. Yes, right. But I do support Cindy. And then let's see what else we got here. Because John says, because God wants you to have faith, and you would react way differently if you knew God existed with full proof. I don't know. Just take a stab. Well, here's the problem with that, John. If God existed, he did 2,000 years ago, and he showed himself to doubting Thomas. He showed himself to the disciples. People knew that he existed, right? I mean, even the devil himself, Satan, knew that God existed. And who was it? Oh my goodness, what was his name? I think it was was it Molina? Who was it? I don't remember. No, it wasn't Molina. It was Anselm. It was Anselm. Okay. Anselm had argued that Satan was given free will by God to make his decisions, because when God gave the devil free will, just designed him as such or created him as such, Satan rebelled and took 1/3 of the host of heaven with him, depending on your Bible story. But Satan knew that God existed. Satan knew that Jesus was God, or whatever, if you're Christian. And he still rebelled. He still said, no, I know that you exist. I have free will. I choose not to. And if Satan didn't want to, how is it for like the human being that is just struggling in the dark to make these decisions? If I knew God existed, then I have more information, and I can base that on, okay, now that I know you exist, I will make that decision to follow you or not, to worship you or not. Might have some questions. I think the Old Testament God and the New Testament God seem like vastly different beings, but like the Jesus of the New Testament, I can get behind him. I mean, sure, Jesus has some great things. I have nothing against cultural Christianity in that regards, I guess, generally speaking. But the Old Testament God was a lot more vengeful, a lot more benevolent, so to speak. I mean, there's been arguments that he came from some kind of Canaanite god. Could have been synonymous with Yaldabaoth in the Greek Gnostic literature, which was that Yaldabaoth created this earth, but he didn't create the heavens called Plamora, and that the knowledge of the unknown God was instilled upon humans by a being called Sophia, who was a lesser aeon, who wanted these emanations or just existence. And Yaldabaoth got pissed at her, I guess, and expelled her from heaven. And when she got expelled, she instilled what's called gnosis, or knowledge of the unknown God, that Yaldabaoth was a trickster god. And this is all part of the Gnostic literature and Pistis Sophia and the Unorder of the World, and which was competitive to the Christian literature between the 1st and 4th century. But they knew Jesus existed. Why don't we have the same opportunities that they had? I mean, if salvation is conditional upon faith, which makes no sense to me, it's based upon a belief. I'm a Dostastic involuntarist, means that I don't think we choose most of our beliefs. Some minds do it. It gives us an answer after processes it and all. But we don't will ourselves to choose to believe something. I can't just will myself to believe I can fly. How's that any different than willing myself to believe that Jesus was the Son of God and salvation is contingent upon him? I can't do it. So it makes no sense that salvation is just conditional upon that. It would make more sense using the word pistis as faith in Christ or faith in God to trust him. But that would mean that you need knowledge of his existence to trust him. Or at least it makes sense, right? And so I think that if to be fully informed, it isn't a matter of, oh, I just believe by blind faith. It is, oh, okay, I see that God exists. I see that Jesus exists. And then I decide to follow him. But the non-believer or the atheist is not at that point. And I know a lot of, and I will just say this, I believe this is dishonest argumentation. A lot of presuppositional apologists out there say, well, my friend Saitan Berniket, another name drop, he argues that all the time. But he won't run precept on me any longer. We've had too many discussions on that, right? I don't like even bothering precept anymore. But it's just dishonest to say, oh, well, you know. And if you know, then you know that you know, the KK principle, which I don't think even, I rethought about it. I don't think I accept the KK principle any longer. I think I reject the KK principle. I think that you can know something without knowing that you know it, but that's another topic. I mean, did I get in the weeds here? I'm sorry. I'm only halfway through this Jim Bob's video there. I'm sorry, Jim Bob. But yeah, you know what? I watched some of Jim Bob's stuff, and that dude can run for 3 hours. So I'm not going to do that. I go for about an hour and a half. So that's kind of my limitation here. So, all right, let's keep going here.
Well, that's not obvious. What's obvious is that we find pain unpleasant. We also find that human beings have the capacity to overcome pain.
Well, not really. I mean, we can overcome pain through medicine that they didn't have thousands of years ago, painkillers, years of therapy. I mean, and there's people that suffer all their lives. Their whole life is suffering. They're always in pain, whether it be physical, emotional, mental, whatever, psychological. I don't understand that argument that we can overcome pain, especially when it's chronic or mental illness. Most of us know what that's like. People know now I have depression. Now my brother had depression. It is something that runs in my family, and it didn't hit me until later on in life. I started noticing it in my 20s, and I did. I'll put this out there. I did go to medical. I sought medical help in the 20s, and they put me on medication, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I tried different things and made my teeth grind, and I went to my doctor, and I'm like, look, my teeth grinding. I don't remember what it was what he gave me. I think it was Paxil. That's what it was, Paxil. And I hated it. It made my teeth grind. And he's like, well, that's not a side effect. Come to find out it was a side effect. And it made me feel weird. Now I just get my energy through coffee. But I don't like amitriptyline because it makes me, bleh. But I'm hoping that I get something maybe eventually soon that works. But right now, because of other medical stuff, I can't really even get anything, which really sucks. But not to derail this, but depression is something that I have no control over. It literally is because of low serotonin levels. It's a biological factor. It's not just, oh, I'm not happy. It is a biological genetic issue that runs in my family, right? So to overcome that, sure, I can go to the doctor. I can get eventually on proper medication. And, okay, but, some things can't. Some things can't be overcome. And Jim Bob says, some people didn't overcome. It can't be overcome. Yeah, some people can't, Awesome says, according to the Bible, this is what he did in order to show forth his glorious son, Jesus Christ. Well, and here's the thing, and I will play devil's advocate for a second. The earth is 4.54 billion years old. Whether you're a creationist or not a creationist, and that is what the science teaches. That is a scientific fact, whether you like it or not. You can say you don't agree with it. Okay, doesn't matter. The fact is, it is a scientific fact. The fact is, that is what the science says. Right? Even the most diehard creationist agrees with that. That is what the science says. Now, I don't know why they would say otherwise, because you can go to a book and read a science book. That's what it says. And the universe is 13.9 billion years old, give or take, right? And that means that God waited 8 billion years or so, whatever it is, for the universe to make the earth, to where everything that had happened in the earth's history led up to the birth of Jesus in Nazareth or Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. There are Christians that actually do argue this. Dr. Hugh Ross and Dr. Fuzz Ronner, who are from Reasons to Believe, Respect them both. Great people. Loved my time doing my show with them. But they do believe that all the things that have happened in the existence of the universe since it was came into existence all led up to the existence of Christ. I just can't wrap my head around that. And you can argue that's incredulity. Okay, but it would mean that there has to be this amazing determination from God, where God has to intervene to make things happen through these one-time events called singularities that were called that Gentry called them singularities. Remember way ago, I did this video on polonium halos, explaining why polonium halos are not evidence of a young Earth, which even Gentry argued they're not evidence of a young Earth. They're evidence of Earth solidifying within 2 weeks, was his argument. And I made a video using physics, showing about the physics of why it isn't at all evidence for that, how it actually is explained by actual physics. So they didn't know years ago. So anybody who's running Gentry argument has not caught up on the literature, because we have explained polonium or perchlorate or they call it perchlorate halos, but whatever, halos, radioactive halos, prechloric halos, and Gentry even argued that there are these one-time events that God does to make things come about. And so the reasons to believe that there is the hand of God, a theistic evolutionary path, and that at some point in time, God instilled man with some kind of thing called a soul, and then from that line of phylogeny became us. That really is kind of the reasons to believe narrative. I hope I'm not missing that out, but my talks with Dr. Rana and Hugh do point me into that kind of a belief that that's what their beliefs are. I have a lot of their books, obviously, and that's what I get out of it, right? And so somebody says, Steve, bro, it doesn't matter what happened 330 million years ago. What matters what happened 2,000 years ago. The Old Testament prophesies prove the coming Messiah without a doubt. No, not at all. The matter of fact, again, I'm not a biblical person or biblicalist, I guess. I don't know. I don't think the prophecies do that. Even my Jewish heritage, the Jews are still waiting for the Messiah, right? From my understanding, the Jewish people were supposed to be led out of bondage from the slavery. And that didn't happen. It wasn't supposed to be a manifestation of God that saved them eternally. That came, I think, later. But again, I'm not somebody who knows much about the Bible. I'll get annihilated in those discussions. I'll probably get annihilated in any discussion.
Keep in mind, there are people who are born without the ability to feel pain, and yet they arguably suffer more than those who can feel pain.
Possibly. The thing with that is that if you're born with pain is a biological mechanism to warn people of danger, right? If you put your hand on a stove, your instinct pulls it away. It's instinctual to pull that hand away. And so we have pain as a biological mechanism to prevent further damage. But when it's chronic, when it's genetic, when it's psychological pain, how is that a benefit to anybody? It's not a biological benefit. It's almost sadistical. Because look, I know people that have suffered through a lot of stuff, and again, I think all humanity, everybody has their burdens to bear. Nobody has gone through life without knowing what it means to be in pain or suffer. We all have. Many of us do it a lot, and we just put on a brave face and we go out there, right? I get it. I absolutely 100% get it. But that type of suffering is way beyond merely pain that is a biological protection mechanism. Way beyond that. And if you are an omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omniscient being, why would you not want to stop that? If I had the power to prevent people from being hurt, I would do that. It'd make me a cool superhero, right? It'd make a cool superhero. So.
Well, I suppose we could redefine it and say that emotional and mental anguish would be the deciding factor in what is suffering. Isn't it?
Well, it's a type of suffering. I don't know if this is really what Harris said or not. I don't know. Somebody, my friend Skeptic says, have you talked to James Tor? Why would I talk to James Tor? He's way out of my depths. I'm not a fan of James Tor. I just think that his debate with Professor Dave they both were way out to lunch. And I got a lot of positive feedback by criticizing Professor Dave, and yet I got a lot of negative attention on that as well. But my review, I think, was really good. That Professor Dave did not at all address the topic, and he was just there to take a crap on James Tour. And whether you like James Tour or not, that was not a debate. I do think James Tour willfully tries to intellectually be dishonest sometimes, absolutely. But that wasn't the point of the debate. It wasn't to debate James Tour's character. It was a debate about, in the literature, what we know about abiogenesis, right? But I would be way out of my depth with James Tour. One, I'm not a chemist. I barely remember water chemistry that I took for my nuclear stuff. Barely remember. I can remember the difference between hydronium and hydroxyl, and that's about it, man. But
Emotional and mental hardship an essential feature of growth? Even from an evolutionary perspective, the cycles the human body endures are sometimes painful.
yeah, that's true, but are they necessarily painful? Is pain something that is metaphysically necessary? Of course not. They could have made childbirth not as painful for women. They could have made menstrual cramps, or God could have made menstrual cramps. I am telling you, let me drink some water here. I had a whole pot of coffee for this. See what I do for you guys? A whole pot of coffee just to get me mentally prepared for this video. This is just water. Like my cool cup. God could have made menstrual cramps less painful for women. And if you want to alleviate suffering, why didn't he just do that? Because it wasn't until recently we had things that could alleviate pain, medicine that can alleviate pain, epidurals that can do alleviation of pain for childbirth, or Midol for cramps. Women didn't have that 2,000 years ago. Why do they need to suffer for that when women today don't have to suffer as bad? Women do suffer through these things, absolutely. But I think it is a pretty rational position to take that modern women has less suffering than women thousands of years ago.
But their biological processes, are they evil?
Steve says you're proving incredulity angle to be spot on. I absolutely disagree. Why? This is not incredulity. I'm not saying anything about, I just don't believe it, or I refuse to believe it, I can't believe it, or it seems incredulous. Not at all. It is your argument doesn't make any sense from the logical problem of evil. It's not a defense of the logical problem of evil. You're migrating. This is where you start migrating into your evidential problem of evil problems. And the evidential problem of evil is, why is there natural evils out there? Why is just gratuitous evil? Why are there things like tornadoes? Why are there things like pain? And the theodicies are out there to justify why there's pain. But the justification for pain, the justification that you're asking for here, because you're asking for a justification, has nothing to do with the defense of the logical problem of evil, which deals with the inconsistency of the system. That's what the logical problem is. The logical problem is dealing with the truth values of the syllogism, the modus tollens that you produced at the beginning. That's what the logical problem is. Logical problem is of evil. So you have to show that those propositions can all be true at the same time. That's a defense of it. And Plantinga attempts to do that in his free will defense, but I haven't got that far yet.
There is a larger problem for this view that was best articulated by William Lane Craig in his debate against Harris several years ago. If well-being is the basis for moral good, is it possible to obtain the peaks of well-being by causing harm? Well, yes, it's not only logically possible, but history demonstrates that groups of people can and have maximized their well-being by causing suffering to others.
No. I think you make a fundamental error here. It is logically inconsistent. You cannot have a being that has all the knowledge, all the power, and all good that allows for evil to exist. You cannot do it unless you run something like a free will defense, which, like I said, I want to get into, right? That's the problem with the logical problem of evil. Is that it isn't about gratuitous evils. It's not about natural evils. It's not even about moral evils. It's the fact that, how are these propositions all true? Because God has the power to fix things. God has the knowledge to fix things. And God is maximally good that he wants to have things fixed. He wants perfection. That's what the problem is. And I think you're really encroaching into the evidential problem of evil here.
When the atheist says pain and suffering is bad, they are actually saying most people don't prefer to feel pain or suffering.
No, I don't. Look, I think, Jim, I think you're talking to the wrong atheist out there. That's what I'm really thinking. Because pain itself may not be bad. Pain, if you hurt yourself in order to save yourself from worse injury, that could be considered good. Right? A minor pain to produce, it's called value pluralism or moral pluralism. But in this case, can still considered to be a moral evil, but a lesser moral evil, and it's the one that you choose. Or you can argue that it's not even evil at all because it doesn't have any lasting harm. It's there to serve a purpose. And so minor pain, depending on your viewpoint, may not even be evil. But suffering that serves no purpose other than just suffering is evil. And especially if you have the ability to correct it. If you're a doctor and you can serve somebody to reduce their pain, if you're a doctor and you can fix their maladies, you can cure them of something. That's your job to do it, right? We have doctors that can do it. But God can do it. So why do we need the doctors? God could have prevented that illness to begin with. Why do we need the doctors? That's the argument of the logical problem of evil. Jim says, what is evil the absence of? Well, that's called the privation of good. Some of them argue the privation of good. I don't think that's a strong argument. I don't think evil is the privation of good because that doesn't count for natural evils. Right? And moral evils, you can argue privation of good. Right? It isn't a good act, therefore it's privation that it is an immoral act. Even from a deontological standpoint, a duty standpoint, that you have some kind of moral grounding with some kind of rule that you have to abide by. You can argue that if I break that rule, it is not good, right? It's the privation of good. But natural evils like tornadoes and things of that nature, there is no such thing as privation of good. It makes no sense.
With licorice either.
Licorice.
If the atheists prefer to feel pain or suffering.
Some people do.
Most people don't prefer the taste of licorice either.
Licorice.
I do. I like licorice. Now, by the way, that is actually a genetic thing. I don't know that, but black licorice, when I understand, some people prefer it and don't based upon their genetics, I guess. What is it? Parmesan cheese too. Some people think tastes like baby vomit. And then cilantro. Some people hate the taste of cilantro. Some people just don't like the taste of black licorice because they're lacking whatever enzyme it is to break it down, I guess, that makes them like it. I could be misremembering that. But I do know that licorice, some people really think black licorice tastes really, really bad. I'm not one of them. I happen to like black licorice. But that's because our brain tells us what we like. So when we say we have a preference of like black licorice over red licorice, our minds are telling us this. Our brain's doing all that processing. I can't change my preference. I can't say, oh, I like red licorice better now. This is our brain that tells us this. We have no control over that. That's all biological.
Atheist is claiming that we ought to pursue our preferences, then I'm not sure what was wrong with Jeffrey Dahmer eating brain custard. He merely preferred it to Ben & Jerry's.
And this is what I think is such a bad argument. It's not a matter of preference. A preference would be vanilla versus chocolate, red licorice versus black licorice. Something like this, I think everybody agrees is a moral act. And if you don't, then you're going to be chastised through society because we're going to call you a sociopath. We have laws set up against this kind of stuff. Every country has certain laws. Every one of them has very similar laws against certain things. Why? Because every society realized you cannot allow certain things and have a functional society. And just to go to an extreme, like who was it? King Herod wanted all the babies killed. Was it King Herod? If I'm not mistaken, from the Bible. But every country, if you killed off every single child that existed, that society would die out. That is an objective fact. Objective fact. That is an ontological objective fact. And you can argue that it's immoral to do that. right? Is it objectively immoral to do that? But him having a taste for this, we have laws against that because of that very reason. Society has already deemed this to be immoral. And if you live in that society, you're kind of you're beholden to those types of laws. You know? So this is, I think, is a really, really bad argument.
Now, for the sake of the argument, what if we grant the...
And let me ask you guys, do you think Dahmer was evil? I do. I mean, okay, let me reword that. Do you think what Dahmer did was a good act? That's how I'm going to word it. But let me know in the live chat. Do you think what he did was a moral good? Not that it was morally bad, but was it a moral good? Because I think that anybody thinks that was a moral good is probably a sociopath or psychopath like him. Right? Because those people that have malfunctionings of the mind that think something like that is socially acceptable, something like that is a moral good, needs to have therapy, needs to have a psychological evaluation. So let me ask you guys out there, do you think that was a moral good? And this has nothing to do with secularism, Jim Bob. Secularism is the belief that religion shouldn't be encroached into the domain of government and public school systems. Separation of church and state, which I absolutely 100% stand by. And I think that every Christian should be a secularist. Every one of them should be a secularist. Why? Because if your particular brand of religion isn't the one that's most popular, you're SOL. If you're Baptist and all of a sudden the Catholics get in charge in a local area, you're screwed. If you're Catholic and the Baptists get in charge, you're screwed. Or the Protestants get in charge. Why would you not want a secular society where everybody can have the faith and basis belief that they want, as long as it doesn't encroach upon anybody else's rights and it's not forced upon them by the state or in a public school? Why would you not want to be a secularist? Because again, if your particular belief is not going to be more likely the one that's going to be institutional in the local government region, and especially at the federal level or state level.
The atheist that evil exists in the world. If evil exists, this necessitates an absolute standard for good. The moment the atheist says evil does in fact exist, beyond our opinions or our preferences, then they are also saying an absolute standard of good exists.
No, they're not. No, you're not. I don't even see that in that's certainly not a logical entailment, and I don't see how it even is an implication. I can say evil exists, I can say good exists. I'm not a believer, I'm not an atheist. I'm not a theist either. But I'm a non-believer. I fall into that non-believer. I don't believe in theism and I don't believe in atheism. I don't think either one of them are true. Okay? But I can say that without having some kind of standard, right? Even if you have a natural evil, what is it a standard of? I mean, sure, you can arbitrarily say, "Oh, this evil is less than this one." Stubbing your toe is less of a natural evil than, like the Holocaust or something. Sure, or even in the case of a deontological nature or argument to duty for a rule of law. You have different levels of misdemeanors and felonies that all some kind of graduated spectrum. But that's arbitrary, right? Those are completely arbitrary. So just because I accept evil doesn't mean that I have to base it upon any kind of maximally great being or maximally evil being. It just doesn't follow. There's no implication there. You need to develop a really strong argument for that. And maybe Jimbob will do a video on making a logical syllogism to say, okay, well, God or evil must exist if you accept there are natural evils in the world. I don't know how that would follow. So hurricanes evil and sunsets morally good? No, hurricanes are evil when they cause issues, and I would say sunsets are morally inert. They're innocuous. Yeah. Now, to a spiritualist, they might say it's morally good. I don't know. I think spiritualism is very tailored. I think that we can look at something and see beauty in something, and aesthetics. I think the argument from aesthetics and all this. I think we should appreciate music. My reality is blown away when I look at the complexities of music, because people know I love music. And when you look at something like that, it's spiritual almost. It's surreal. The integration with music and mathematics and tonalities. It's just magnificent. But I wouldn't necessarily call it a moral good. But some may. And the reason being is that that's not how they look at natural evils. But it's okay. I'm okay with that. You can call it a moral good. You know, if you want to say that hurricanes are moral evils because they cause harm, and music is a moral good because you can appreciate it, I'm okay with that. Yeah, no big deal. Jim says, Steve, you agreed last video that the effects of physics aren't true or false. Well, I mean, they're not propositional, what I agreed on, right? If you have a proposition, if I say, here, I got my contacts. If I drop my contacts, they're going to fall to the earth. That's a true proposition. But just saying gravity, law of gravity, that's not a proposition. If I just say E equals MC squared, that's not a proposition. You know, if I say E equals M to the fourth, C to the, what is it? When you add the momentum in, right? P to the squared, M to the fourth. So it's E equals M for, was it M? No, it's E equals M squared C to the fourth plus P squared M to the fourth, correct? Isn't it? You guys remember your physics out there? When you add in the momentum and position of a particle for something that's going to the light speed, it changes E equals MC squared. And so that's just a law of the universe, right? That's something that we put into formalization when we say, okay, we notice that a particle is going to have this much energy based upon its mass times the speed of light squared, and as it's moving, it's going to have all this momentum with it, this position and momentum that's going to make that even much higher. Matter of fact, at speed of light, that even becomes even more powerful than E equals MC squared, which is a lot of energy, by the way. The energy in a golf ball, if all converted to mass, would wipe out Southern California. Now, when you start adding, the relativistic velocities to it, that even more than the E equals MC squared. So when you get, if we were hit with something traveling at the speed of light, the size of a golf ball, yeah, Southern California's gone. So probably in California. I mean, I would have to calculate the amount of joules, but it's a lot of energy, But yeah, the physics itself isn't true or false. It's just the propositions of physics are true or false, right? Predictions. If I predict something to be the case.
So, what is this good standard? We've already established that it's not maximum well-being because the maximum well-being can be attained through causing suffering.
No,
to
it can't. No, that's literally a violation of the grounding. In Unum Modia, that is a violation of grounding. So no, that doesn't make any sense. You cannot say, oh, it can be established through harm. No, we can just say, look, there is harm. I don't even know if there's a maximally great harm, but we do say that some things are more harmful than others. But the fact that the harm exists and God hasn't done anything about it is the logical problem of evil. Not that it exists. You're not trying to justify that evil exists, because that's, again, the evidential problem of evil, which I think you do conflate in here. To defend the logical problem of evil, you need a defense. This is not a defense. This is a justification, which is a theodicy of something more along the lines of the evidential problem of evil. I'm going to talk about Plantinga's Plantinga's free will defense in a second.
In conclusion, the problem of evil, or the argument from evil, quite easily reduces to a Reddit level slogan. If God real, why bad thing happen? If God real, why not I get into art school? If God real, why come I need oxygen to live? If God real, why come I'm not God? Out of the many atheist arguments against God, I think the argument from evil is one of the most worthy of the trash bin.
No, what's so funny is it's not. And the problem of evil, the logical problem of evil, is very, very narrow in scope, but is one of the most solid out there. There are people that have argued that it's been assailed, but there's people like Graham Oppie, who is one of the greatest philosophers of our time, my favorite contemporary philosopher, analytical contemporary philosopher. He argues that it's not assailed, and I respect Oppie, and I do understand a little bit why he's arguing it hasn't been assailed. I happen to agree with him, but it is a very strong argument. The argument from evil is a weaker argument, but broader in scope, and it is more easily assailed through a theodicy, but even those theodicies have problems. And I wonder, Jimbob, are you going to do the evidential problem of evil next or something?
There is no problem of evil from the atheist perspective.
Sure there is.
There is only a problem of things you don't prefer.
No, it's not a matter of preference. It's not a matter of preference. That's the whole thing. And that's this whole video right there. I mean, I did put the link to the video. Please go watch it. Leave a comment over in his video. Give him some interactions. So, you know, I like the fact that Jimbob's doing these things, and I like the fact that he's really trying to, you know, put his positions out there, and I respect that immensely, and the fact he will engage on them. And I do the same. So please feel free to leave comments on my video as well. But let me talk about the Plantinga defense, which is typically the way most theists would argue this. Okay. So Plantinga would argue that this actualized possible world is the only world that's allowed that he could have created, where he had the ability to have free will, which is man's decisions to be able to make a decision without influence, external or internal, which I believe cannot exist or does not exist because we are biological creatures, at least not libertarian free will. Free will itself exists, and if you use free will to mean will, fine. If you use free will to mean libertarian free will, I don't see how that's possible. Incompatibilism makes no sense to me. And that is an argument from credulity. It makes no sense to me because I've looked into it, and it violates biological facts about humanity and how we look at the world, and how we are biologically hardwired to have certain beliefs and certain predispositions. Therefore, we can never be 100% unduly influenced. We can never have true free will in that regard, like in a libertarian free will sense. Right. So Plantinga argues that this world is the only one that can be created to allow for free will, because free will implies that there's going to be some kind of evil, and that there is no logical incongruity between the two. Okay? And he's not wrong on this, by the way, I don't think. That's not where the problem is. Plantinga's free will defense is a really good argument against the logical problem of evil. Okay? It really is. If you really look at it, he's not wrong per se, because he's trying to say, here's a defense of this argument. He's not trying to justify it through an evidentialist point of view. He's trying to say, look, this is how you get around the logical inconsistency of that system. Remember what I said at the beginning? The logical problem of evil deals with the inconsistent system, that the premises cannot all be true at the same time. So he argues that there are no other possible counterfactual worlds based upon his middle knowledge that can be even actualized to be the real world, where you have a world where there's free will without evil. Okay, let's grant him that. Let's grant him that. I mean, if you're going to create a human, and you're going to give that human free agency, maybe it might imply, maybe it might even metaphysically entail that evil is going to happen. Not gratuitous evil, but moral evil. Okay? Because gratuitous evil wouldn't matter if we exist or not, right? Well, I mean, it does, actually. I shouldn't say that, because there's only evils because we exist. If there's a world without life, what would a natural evil be? You know, what would it be? What's happening on another planet? Like, look at, like, you know, a planet that's raining down fire and sulfuric acid or something, you know. Venus is very inhospitable, right? You got, you know, thousands of degrees temperature. You got sulfuric clouds and sulfur dioxide. You don't want to live on Venus. But it's not a moral evil, or natural evil, I should say. Nobody's there, right? So it's not affecting anything. It's only a natural evil because humans are involved, and we are agents of moral consideration. But he also argues that this world that you have something where you have humans is the only possible world that's allowed. And that's a little bit problematic. That's a little bit problematic that he's saying that all possible worlds cannot have free will and evil in it, and he only could make this one. He called it transworld depravity. That transworld depravity was man is depraved in all worlds. Okay? And so he couldn't even actualize any other world. This is the only way it could have been. Only way it could have been. But then, Oppie comes into play, and Oppie wrote a book called Arguing About Gods. And he argued that, well, Plantinga's free will defense does kind of explain what was one of the original versions of the logical problem of evil by Mackey, who was a error theorist. He wrote a really amazing book called The Miracle Theism. Miracle Theism, I highly recommend it to everybody. Miracle Theism gets to the nitty-gritty of all these different arguments. And so the way Mackey kind of articulated this particular argument, his free will defense is a little bit more tailored to, but Oppie says no, it actually doesn't really defend against it, because he doesn't show why it is logically impossible to have an infinite number of possible worlds where in one of them he could have created a world that had humans that had free will, but the human or the moral agent consideration only was able to choose between morally good acts. He could have done that. There's nothing illogical about that. That doesn't have any logical contradictions in it. So Plantinga's argument that he has, just demolished the free will, demolished the logical problem of evil by free will, isn't that strong when you start adding in these possible worlds. Because Oppie would have argued, and he did argue, that God could have created this possible world where there was free will, but it was only free will of man to do good things. He could have done that. There's nothing preventing God from doing that. God's all good, right? He could have created a world where he had free will. So there's no logical necessity why there had to be the choices to be evil. So I'm looking at my live chat here. Yeah, let's keep down the spam there, George. All right. So anyways, that's kind of a nutshell. This has gone way longer than normal. I told Andrew I was going to invite him in and Jimbob, but I don't keep these things for very long. Can we maybe schedule something, and have you guys come in again? I started this at 9, and I usually go 90 minutes, and that's just because it's more easily digestible. Would you guys be okay with that? I'm not trying to blow them off. I really do want to talk to them, but I might have plans here coming up, and I wanted to kind of get through this. So I'm checking my mail right now. I'm just waiting for somebody to message me that's supposed to get off tonight. And I might go do something. So, one sec. Dang it. But anyways, is that okay with you guys? Can I message you, Andrew, and Jimbob, and maybe we can set something up for another night? Because I want to keep this under 90 minutes. This ran a lot longer than I expected for a 5-minute video, So. And, sorry, George. I didn't want George. I didn't want to hide George. I just want all that spam off there. So, George, I just hid you and then unhid you to get rid of all that spam. But you're not hidden, George. But stop the spam. It's very hard for me to read when I have a hard enough time over here. But anyways, what's your guys' questions? See if I can answer any questions for the last 6 minutes. And I'm sure Jimbob's going to review this and tear it all to heck. That's fine. That's what he's supposed to do. But I mean, I would hope that he brings in maybe a moral theorist, like a non-believer, and at least they can, not your average atheist out there either, because I think Jimbob both and I agree. Some of the atheists we talk about there are just silly, just absolutely silly. And that's what I'm saying. I don't think they know how to even argue against some of these things. I don't think they even know the difference between a defense and a theodicy. And I did an entire video on the logical problem of evil, I don't know, 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. I have a whole video on my channel just dedicated to the logical problem of evil. So I mean, it's been I've been around that particular argument for quite some time. But I don't think that your argument assails it. It's not a defense. It seems a lot more as a theodicy toward an evidential argument. And all right, bye, George. Sorry, gotta go. I just don't like spam. I did warn him, right? I know. I didn't want to have to do that, but whatever. But I just don't think an argument from incredulity is a proper defense against a logical argument where you're trying to show that the system is inconsistent. That's what it is. In order to do defense, you have to show the system is inconsistent. And how do you do that? You attack the premises, and that's what Plantinga does with his free will defense. And like I said, Plantinga is a smart guy. I think his theodicy against the evidential problem is really bad. I do think, and I'm not going to get into it, but he has to invoke Adam and Eve even. I think his theodicies are not good, but his free will defense is a good argument against the logical problem of evil. But there are ways of defeating that as well, as Graham Oppie points out, because he just argues that God could have created a world where he didn't have humans be able to decide between immoral things, but just moral things, and it still would have been logically possible. It is no logical necessity to say that for humans to exist and given free will, evils have to exist. There's no logical entailment there. You could argue that if you have free will and you're given free range for everything, maybe, but why did God have to do that? There's no logical necessity for that, especially when he's omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient. So, considering there's evil to some is considered subjective. How do we define objective evil? Again, objective evil would be if it violates the grounding of the hypothetical syllogism. Hypothetical imperative. Oh my. This is why I'm saying my coffee is wearing off. So hypothetical syllogism is something completely different logic. Yeah, George was derailing the chat, but I am fading. And like I said, I might head out with a friend tonight. So I guess every time they get off, but it's just we're trying to do a man on the street type stuff where we go out and ask people questions like this and ask them if they know about the logical problem of evil or something, or just get their opinions on stuff. So we're trying to do something for the channel like that, and we're gonna talk about that tonight. So we have to see when we get off. But all right, you guys got no other questions on this, really? I'm at the 90-minute mark, so speak now, forever hold your peace. Is Andrew still in the live chat? Is Jim still in the live chat? I didn't bore them. Andrew speaks on a whole different level. I mean, that dude is way the hell up here in debates. I can hold my own in debate when it's something that I really do know about, or at least better. I debated, that one guy, was it Rob Goin? And I think it's safe to say that he got decimated. He didn't even know what law of logic was, but I mean, it was not a good debate for him. And then, I've proven that I can debate, certain topics, at least to the point where I'm comfortable, but I don't even want to do that anymore. I'm not going to debate like macroevolution any longer. That was, 6 years ago I had my debate with Wayne Fillmore on macroevolution. And yes, he did leave Young Earth Creationism, and he's still a Christian, but he is a old Earth Creationist after our debate. So I influenced somebody. I did change his position. He did write an article on it on Biologos. But I don't remember that level that I need to even talk about that particular topic, because, man, I studied for like 2 weeks for that debate. I had to learn how to even pronounce some of them, like Paralipithecus catalonicus. I will never forget that, because I was like, I don't even know how to pronounce this, Paralipithecus catalonicus. I'll never forget, but I practiced it for like a week for that debate. I'm not even joking. I kid you not. I was like, Paralipithecus catalonicus. And you know what's going to be funny? Watch somebody like Jackson Wheat tell me, Steve, you've been saying it wrong all this time. I'd be like, oh. And I do want to get Jackson Wheat with Jimbob. And so, Jimbob, if you're still out there, or if you listen to this later, let me know, because Jackson Wheat is willing to have a discussion with you about macroevolution. And I'm part of it too. I mean, I just don't host them. I'm not just a moderator. I do like to talk about it. So I just should say that Jackson Wheat and I would like to talk about it. Now, Jimbob has another video that he did today. It was a live video, and it's with somebody about evolution. And I just saw it come up. I have it on one of my tabs. Long video, so we'll see how much if I can get through it on my own. But, I don't know what he's arguing. I don't know what he's arguing. I have no idea. But I do know that Young Creation is false. So, thoughts on fourth dimensional as a counter to the problem of evil? I have no idea. Yeah, no clue. Andrew and Jay Dyer are competing for most annoying debater award. No, that goes to T-Jump. Come on. That has got to be T-Jump. He kind of, and you know what's funny is T-Jump and I get along. T-Jump and I get along. We've had our differences and whatever. But I listen to Andrew's debates sometimes, and I don't even understand what he's talking about because I understand the subject matter. I'm not into this patriarch. I'm not into this subjugation and men and women. I've watched the whatever podcast a few times, and I have no idea what the heck they're talking about sometimes. But I do watch it because it's entertaining. Because the women they bring on there are not the best suited sometimes to have these discussions. Well, whatever. T-Jump interviews people every day. Does he really? Wow. I don't have the time. I don't have the patience. I don't have the energy to do that. Biker says, thanks for this. It was interesting and give me a couple points to think about. Good. That's the greatest takeaway. Look, if somebody can say, hey, I gained something out of this, awesome. Awesome. I like that. That's what it means to me. And so, I'm never going to build this channel the way, it former glory days. I'm not going to build a non-sequitur show to former glory days. I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to put out what I like talking about, and people want to listen, and they get something out of it. Power to them, I would say G-Man or DD are the worst debaters on the planet. Yeah. And there's two reasons for that. And I know we're going a little bit long here. One, G-Man you have to understand as a character. G-Man does believe what he believes, but he goes over the top on purpose, right? When you see him on camera, he's a different person. That is a character that he plays. I mean, in real life, he's a lot like that, from what I understand. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's faking it. That's not what I'm trying to imply. But he over-exaggerates on purpose. Yeah. DD is just a walking principle of explosion. Falsetto cucubet. Or that false. What is principle of explosion in Latin? Falso de cubet. Is that what it is? I hate Latin. But anyway, principle of explosion. I know what it is. But he's a walking principle of explosion because he can argue anything merely because he argues a contradiction starting out. He'll say one thing, right? And if you say something else, he just takes it in a different direction on a script. And again, I don't mind a script, but an honest script. But you can't have a script where you say this, he has a contradiction. You say this, he has a contradiction. And you have two things on your script that are contradictions. That's not a script. That's sophistry. Ex falso sequitur cobet. I had to look it up. Principle of explosion. That's sophistry, what DD does. DD does not have an honest position in his body. He will just run with anything that's as a contrarian. That's what makes him dishonest in a debate. And I don't like people like that. I like people that have honest positions, and that's why I am really paying attention to people like Jimbob and Andrew Wilson, because I think they really do believe this. They're not pretending to be something else, and I do respect that. That's what I want to see more of, because I deal with people that are flat earthers that I think are posed. I don't think they believe anything that they're putting out. And why would you want to have a discussion with that? That's a waste of time. It does nobody any good. One, it doesn't revise your beliefs in case you're wrong. It doesn't challenge your beliefs. At most, it's just a way to practice arguing against sophistry. That's it. That's all it is. And we know this when it comes to flat Earth. I think even Jim Bob and Andrew Wilson would agree that people that argue flat Earth are dishonest. It's all intellectually dishonest. So you're just practicing how to spot rhetoric, empty rhetoric or negative rhetoric, not positive rhetoric. Because rhetoric just means to argue, right? There's nothing inherently bad about rhetoric. Rhetoric is good, but negative rhetoric is the inflammation, inflammation. I can't even talk right now. The argument where you just have fallacies, right? It doesn't have anything. Implementation. Oh my goodness, of fallacious reasoning. That's all it is. It's sophistry. I tell you, once that coffee wears off, you can see the difference. And this is what I'm saying. My cognitive functions have changed in the last 8 months. Ever since I, had long term or whatever I had, it has affected me greatly. I am not the same person as I was 8 months ago by any means. emotionally, physically, mentally, not the same person. Not to put it down on this particular episode, but I think people recognize it more. People always know I have a hard time remembering certain things, but it has gotten way, way worse. Way, way worse. And it sucks. It sucks. And one of the reasons why I still do these things is because I want to keep my cognitive functions going. I want to be able to keep what memory I have left. My dad, and again, I'm trying to put a damper on this, but my dad, before he passed, had loss of cognitive functions. And this is what I'm saying for the evil that's out there, seeing what my dad went through, why would God allowing something like this? He wasn't the same person. He just wasn't. And so by doing these videos and being able to communicate with my audience and my subscribers, it means a lot to me. The people that are my mods, people that are my members, people that are my Patreons, that, my Patreon has gone way down. It's nowhere near, it's a fraction of whatever it was. But I still have my Patreon. And if you like this kind of stuff, please become a Patreon, become a member. It means a lot to me. And not even for the financial aspect, because yes, I could use the financing. It is that somebody supports me. But the fact that you even show up, I appreciate. People like Gary that I've known a very long time, who I've met in real life. Colorado biker, people know his first name. I'm not doxing him, okay, people? But people know his first name. I met him in real life more than once. Great guy. Yeah, I think he came down twice. Yeah. But great guy. Seriously, really great guy. We had a great time together, so that's somebody that you know in real life, right? That's not somebody you met, off the internet anymore. That becomes somebody you have a personal connection with, that you got to shake hands with or even hug, And they're still around. They're still coming, around my channel. They know me personally in real life. That means something to me. I want to keep those connections, I've been going through my stuff and I've been finding old stuff that I had in the Navy, and I'm like, man, I remember writing this to my family. I don't remember this. And it sucks. But, how about I didn't put a damper on this video, but whatever. It's my channel. I can do what I want. Talk about what I want, right? I need a triple espresso. Yeah. Yeah. I drink a 6 cup of coffee. I had a pot of coffee. So, flat earthers are just sad, pathetic, lonely people looking for attention. Most of them, yeah. Debates are worn out. I think so too. I'm not a fan of the debates. I'm a fan of the dialectics and the discussions. This is what I'm saying. If Jimbob and Andrew want to come on at another time, I think they've already left. Let's have a panel discussion. I'll set it up, and we'll just have an open panel where anybody can come in and have a discussion. I've been invited to jump on some of theirs, but honestly, they're out of my league, and I wouldn't even know what the heck to add to them, unless they had a discussion on something I'm familiar with maybe. Like I said, I did a video on radiometric halos. I know a little bit about reactors, that from what I remember, which is not much. Which is basically philosophy. I'd be grossly out of my league. So. Biker says my argument that there cannot be a benevolent God is because our dogs only live a very short time. Unconditional love from them is good. Yeah. Well, and some people argue that dogs are going to heaven too, or something. That they're also agents of moral consideration to some limited capacity. I mean, dogs. Yes, I'm a huge dog lover. I'm a huge dog lover. Dogs know things, or I should say. Okay, let me say that. I don't want to use knowledge because people think I'm talking about epistemic knowledge rather than colloquial. Dogs believe things, right? Dogs do have intentional states. They're not aware that they're intentional states, but dogs do believe things, right? If they've been trained to have dinner at a certain time, when they look at their food bowl, they're going to believe that there's going to be food there. That's a belief they have. It doesn't necessarily have to be on current, persuasive, active belief, but there is a form of belief there, whether it be dispensational or some other attitude. They do have something which would be constitutive of a psychological state of what they would expect to look in their bowl. And I think that they are pure love. And I think that probably most dogs either bred to be violent or their owners are evil. Yeah. So Andrew's an engineer. What kind of engineer? I didn't know that. What kind of engineer is Andrew? I did not know that. I don't know his background. I have no idea. By the way, did you guys like my Did you guys read my blog on 0.99 repeating equals 1? I just somebody, I heard something. Did somebody become a subscriber? I got a subscriber noise. I think that was. Did you guys read my blog on that? Because that is another thing. I was in Jim Bob's Discord, and some people didn't understand that 0.99 repeating equals 1. So I did a video on it, and I really would like Bob to address it, because I think he may get it now. I think so, but just in case he doesn't, I like to know why. You know, and I get these emails, such and such read your paper, and yet I get the same names a lot. So I'm wondering if they just repeat that. Do you guys know that? On Academic EDU, I get such and such read your paper, how the presumption of atheism by way of semiotic square of opposition leads to semantic collapse, but it seems like the same names. So I don't know if they're rereading it or just randomly come up with these names, because I know the names I know some of the names. That's another thing that Jim Bob and Andrew were supposed to address. I sent them both my paper, and I want to get their thoughts on it. Jim Bob said he put his paper in some kind of AI chatbot or whatever, and maybe found some issues, which it didn't. There's no logical issues. I'm convinced there's no logical issues. And Chat GPT 3.5 sucks for logic and math. It sucks. You can train it, but you have to go this every single time. You have to go through this process of training it, even to understand basic logical inferences. It doesn't even get modus tollens right. It doesn't even get material implications right. It is horribly bad for logic. And I realized that whenever I was talking to some people back on Facebook, and they would try to refute my argument, they just went to Chat GPT 3.5 and got from there, because I'm like, no, this is wrong. But they're like, oh, Steve, you're so wrong. But I think they were thinking, oh, if Chat GPT 3.5 said it's correct, then Steve must be wrong. Not realizing that Chat GPT 3.5 is bad at logic. Bad at logic. Chat GPT 4.0 is supposed to be better, but that's paid. You have to pay for that. And unfortunately, I'm not making anything off YouTube any longer, hardly. Very little. I need to make more off YouTube. I am putting out more content, because I believe that for the Patreons I have left, my members that I have left, and the subscribers and the super chats I get, they need to get something out of that. And I think that shows like this is my way of giving back, because they can use these to formulate their own beliefs about the logical problem of evil and these arguments that people have against atheism. Because I just don't think Jim Bob had a good argument against atheism. And I don't even know why he thinks that the logical problem of evil is even relevant to how most atheists would, one, argue it, and two, that type of God was a very specific God to Anselm of Canterbury, was the original, based upon Epicurus. So it doesn't really matter, because they don't even posit those types of attributes any longer. They don't believe that God is all powerful, where he can do anything because of the principle of eternal verities. They do believe that God has limitations. They do believe that even an all knowing God can only know things that are knowable. And then you could have things like Finch's paradox of Finch's paradox of knowability, where if there are things that can be known, and that there are truths out there, that all truths are known, which is a strange paradox. But again, they don't posit the same omni that they did back 500 years ago, whenever it was. When did Anselm of Canterbury live? 1600s? Is that right? Am I off on that? Again, my history is really bad. But I think Anselm lived in the oh my goodness, when did he live? Was it earlier than that? Was it in the was it 1000 BC? Is that when he lived? Was it the 11th century? My history is really bad. I'm going to say the 11th century. I think it was. I'm trying to look, but I'm not going to sit there and Google stuff. But I think that's what it was. Skynet is coming from well. Oh, mechanical? Really? Andrew's a mechanical engineer? Interesting. Because I'm not a mechanical engineer, but that's what I studied in the Navy, was mechanical engineering. Because you have to know about mechanical engineering to work on a nuclear reactor, right? You have to understand things like Young's modulus, stress, strain, carbon steel piping impingement, and brittle fracture, and temperatures and pressures, and hardness, and things of that nature. These are all material physics that we had to learn, because you have to understand that as that reactor heats up, right, you have to have certain material that's going to be able to heat up slowly so it doesn't have what's called plastic deformation. Oh, he's a robotic engineer. Oh, fascinating. That would be all like more, not just mechanical engineering, but electronics, dealing with, 555 timers, quad operational amplifiers, 4077 quad operational amplifier, 555 and 556 timer. Man, that was, I go a long way back when the microcontroller stuff. What am I getting noises for? My alerts are going off, and I don't even know why. There's something going on. I'm not getting any super chats. I'm not getting any subscribers, but they're just alerting me to stuff. Weird. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Can you guys hear that when it goes off? It should. It comes through on my speakers. But anyways, I'm gonna wrap this up because I think they've already left. Anyways, but let me know what you think. Leave me a comment. And like I said, please like, subscribe, share the video, and become a member if you can of the channel. I appreciate that. Every little bit helps, and hope you guys got something out of this. Okay, and with that, I'm gonna wrap it up and look forward to the next time Made by Jim Bob has another argument against atheism that I can do a review on. But long story short, I don't think Jim Bob at all assailed or defended the logical problem of evil. It is not just a mere incredulity. It is just, I think he made some fundamental, to me, weird connections between evils and preferences and evidential problem of evil. And maybe I'm way off of that. And I know a lot of philosophy people, and hopefully they'll check out this video and tell me, hey, Steve, no, you totally misread Jim Bob's argument. And I'll come back on and go, yeah, man, I'll screw the pooch on that one. Or they said, oh, yeah, you did a fine job. I'm not expecting high praise, but I'll take what I can get. I'll take what I can get. So with that, guys, my coffee is wearing off. And like I said, I'm probably going to head out here, hopefully. So with that, good night. Leave a comment, like and subscribe.